Welcome to this presentation about the COVID-19 guidance from the government on how we can start getting back to work safely. So on Sunday evening, the Prime Minister made a statement where he made it clear that the government is now actively encouraging people to go back to work. And then this was followed on Monday with the 51-page document, Our Plan to Rebuild the UK Government's COVID-19 Recovery Strategy. And then the following day, there was further guidance released for employers in specific sectors. The sectors that were included in this new guidance were construction and other outdoor workers, factories, plants and warehouses, labs and research facilities, offices and contact centres, working in other people's homes, restaurants offering takeaway or delivery, shops and branches, and vehicles. So the first thing to make clear is that this new guidance only applies to England. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have different rules and guidance. So the first thing that the guidance discusses is completing a COVID-19 risk assessment. So in order to carry out this risk assessment, you're going to need to consult with workers. So asking for their opinions about what will work in your specific workplace. You're also going to need to look at existing controls, so what you already have in place, and then review the guidance from the government to make sure that you're staying within the legal requirements. This new guidance makes it clear that where employers fail to follow the guidance and don't take action to comply with the public health legislation and guidance to control public health risks, they will consider taking a range of actions, including issuing of enforcement notices. So the guidance makes it clear that the objective is to reduce the risk to the lowest reasonably practicable by taking preventative measures. And it gives us 5 steps that we need to think about. These are: number 1, in every workplace, increase the frequency of hand washing and surface cleaning. Step 2, enable workers to work from home wherever possible. So that's still the main control measure, is to work from home where we can. But where it's not possible, then to work from home is to comply with the social distancing or keeping 2 meters apart. Where it isn't possible to maintain this 2 meters, then we need to consider whether the activity needs to continue for the business to operate. Step 4, it mentions that we need to take all mitigating action. So I'll go through this in more detail later on in the presentation, but it includes things like hand washing and surface cleaning, keeping the activity for as short a time as possible, using screens and barriers, back-to-back or side-to-side working rather than face-to-face, and reducing the number of people. And step 5 is, if the people must work face-to-face, assess whether the activity can safely continue. Interestingly, the guidance then goes on to state that no one is obliged to work in an unsafe work environment. So, which is why it's important to carry out that consultation with workers during the risk assessment process. So once the risk assessment has been completed, then the results or the findings of that risk assessment then need to be shared with employees. And the government is also expecting businesses with more than 50 employees to display this risk assessment on their website, and for all businesses to display this poster to state that the business is complying with the government guidance. The government's guidance then looks at who should be going out to work and restates the objective that everyone should work from home unless they can't do so. And then it outlines steps that we need to consider. So number 1, it says to consider who is needed on site. For example, support staff should work from home if at all possible. Number 2, planning for the minimum number of people needed to be on site to operate safely and effectively. For example, workers that are deemed necessary to carry out physical works, to supervise work, or conduct work in order to operate safely. Number 3, monitoring the well-being of people who are working from home and helping them to stay connected to those that are operating in an outdoor environment, especially if the majority of their colleagues are on site. Number 4, keeping in touch with off-site workers, including their working arrangements, their welfare, their mental and physical health and their personal security. And number 5, providing equipment for people to work from home safely and effectively, including remote access to work systems. The guidance identifies specific groups of people who may need additional protection. It mentions, first of all, the clinically extremely vulnerable individuals. So these are the ones who have received a letter from the NHS advising them to stay at home. The guidance also states that employers need to bear in mind workers who are living with a clinically extremely vulnerable person. Then we have what are described as clinically vulnerable. So this includes those who are over 70, those with certain pre-existing health conditions and pregnant women. Now it states that these can go to work if they cannot work from home, but they should be given the safest roles possible and trying to keep that 2 meters distance from other people as much as possible. The other group of people that it mentions is those that have symptoms of coronavirus and need to self-isolate. So these should stay at home and either work from home if possible or be on sick leave if they can't work from home. It's also important to bear in mind the principles of the Equality Act. So we need to make sure that the steps that we are taking don't have an unjustifiable and negative impact on some groups compared to others. So we might need to consider making some reasonable adjustments for workers. The guidance now differs slightly for the different sectors in how the social distancing measures can be implemented, but I'm going to go through the common themes and then talk a little bit later about some of the specific sectors. Okay, so first of all, we have the topic of arriving at work. So some of the suggestions it mentions are about staggering start and finish times just to reduce the number of people that are arriving or leaving at any one time. It also mentions about providing additional parking, again to reduce that congestion at busy times. One of the suggestions it makes is possibly having more than one entry point so that workers are not all using the same entrance. It also suggests that we consider a one-way system to avoid people meeting face to face and also to keep people moving. The one-way system would need to be marked out and communicated, obviously. I've seen a few examples where they've used tape and cones for this, barriers, also marked arrows on the floor. And also it mentions about having hand washing facilities or sanitizer at entry and exit points. So now we move on to the thought of during work and also thinking about breaks. So the guidance makes it clear that we should maintain this 2 meter social distancing wherever it's physically possible. It suggests that we also mark out as a visual of 2 meters as well. It also suggests that we erect screens at any static workstations. We use a consistent pairing system, so the same 2 individuals working together. So if we do need to have people working closer than 2 meters, maybe for manual handling or some other activity, then it should be the same 2 individuals wherever possible. It suggests that we stagger break times as well, and also think about any outdoor areas that could be used safely for breaks. It suggests that we use up any additional space that has been freed up by people working from home. So we use that space that's been freed up, and also reconfigure seatings and tables in common areas to minimise the face-to-face interactions, so people are sitting back to back or side to side rather than face to face. The guidance makes it clear as well that in an emergency situation, we don't need to maintain that 2-metre distancing, but if we are involved in a situation like that, then we should wash our hands or sanitise them after we've dealt with the emergency. So if we think about visitors now, so visitors to our workplace, the first suggestion is to limit the number of visitors. Then also we need to provide clear signage and markings for visitors so they know exactly where to go. We need to also try and maintain a record of all visitors, so then we can trace back if there is an outbreak and we need to find people. But obviously with that we need to be careful about the thought of sharing pens as well. And it also suggests that we have a COVID-19 host and maybe provide training on the responsibilities of this host. So this is the person that sort of guides and looks after visitors. So now we move on to the thought of cleaning then. The guidance makes it clear that we need to ensure that cleaning is carried out before we start going back to work. So before we carry out this return to work, we need to include this in our risk assessment and also develop cleaning procedures and providing hand sanitizer. So it tells us that there's no special products that are required. We just use our usual cleaning products that we would normally use. And to carry out frequent cleaning of objects and surfaces that are touched regularly. So this might include things like door handles, any other surface where people touch. It asks us to think about more frequent or regular removal of waste, and to carry out sanitation of equipment and tools. So thinking about whatever equipment we're using at work, how are we going to clean that and sanitize it? It asks us also to consider the shared equipment. So any equipment that is shared, obviously we're going to try and keep that to a minimum, but where equipment is shared, then it needs to be cleaned and sanitized after each use, again to minimize that transmission risk. So when we think about welfare facilities, the guidance asks us to consider if we need to increase the facilities that we've got available, particularly the hand washing facilities. So do we need additional facilities? We also need to think about how we can increase awareness, so maybe using signs and posters and providing regular reminders to staff about the need for hand washing. Hand sanitizer, so providing hand sanitizer in the welfare facilities. And also it asks us to think about how we're going to provide instructions or guidance for the use of toilets, including the use of toilets and the cleaning of them as well. So I've seen some examples where people have blocked off sort of every other toilet, so just trying to maintain that distance, and also maybe blocking off, especially when there's urinals, every other urinal if we restrict the use of that. It also asks us to think about enhanced cleaning for busy areas. So thinking about any particularly busy areas that we've got in our premises and how we're going to ensure those are cleaned to the sufficient level. Again, waste, thinking about do we need to provide extra facilities or more frequent collections. And also it asks us to consider the use of paper towels wherever possible to dry hands, instead of hand dryers. So the government makes it clear that supplies of RPE, so dust masks and respirators, there's still a shortage of these supplies, and these need to be kept for those that really need it, so for healthcare workers. So it advises against the use of dust masks as an additional precaution against COVID-19. So if you're already needing to wear dust masks or respirators for the work that you do, you should carry on with that. But it shouldn't be introduced as a new control against COVID-19. And the guidance doesn't talk about face coverings, which aren't the same as RPE, and these might offer some limited protection. So it protects other people if the wearer coughs or sneezes, but they do not protect the wearer, and there are more effective control measures to use rather than relying on face coverings. So thinking about deliveries and where deliveries are made, we need to try to minimise that person-to-person contact. So this could be done by using a system for electronic payments and signatures. We could also reduce the frequency of deliveries that are needed, and again to minimise this transmission risk. And where it is necessary for more than one person to work together, either maybe in the vehicle or when loading and unloading, again we need to use this consistent pairing so that the same two individuals are working together. It provides us with a reminder again that we need to allow delivery drivers to access welfare facilities. But apart from that situation, then we should encourage the drivers to stay in their vehicles. So the new guidance provides steps to take for working in vehicles. The first thing it mentions is to avoid multiple occupancies as much as we possibly can. However, where we can't prevent that, it gives us the following suggestions. So first of all, to consider physical screening, but it also states that this shouldn't affect or compromise the driver's visibility when they're driving. Again, we need to use consistent pairing, so it's the same two people who are working together. Where there is more than one person in a vehicle, it mentions to keep the windows open to increase this ventilation. We need to carry out regular cleaning of the vehicle, and also it suggests about sitting side by side rather than face to face in a vehicle. So the guidance encourages employers to engage with workers about the new control measures. It also mentions about communicating regularly with workers and to carry out training as needed. And it also asks us to consider workers whose first language might not be English as well. To think about people's mental health and provide support in that area. To use visual communication, so it mentions things like whiteboards, posters, signs, again to reiterate this message about maintaining this 2 metre social distancing and about hand washing, and asks us to maintain communication with other people except our workers. So this could be our customers, suppliers and trade bodies. The guidance also gives specific guidance for shops, and I think we've probably seen most of these in practice at our local supermarkets, but it asks first of all to limit the number of customers at any time, to use markings to show the 2 metre distance, to encourage electronic payments wherever possible. It also suggests the use of social distancing champions and to provide customers with information on keeping safe, to use visual communication, again posters and signs, and to maintain communication with other people, including delivery drivers, customers, suppliers, etc. The guidance on working in other people's homes, it advises that we maintain a 2 metre distance from the householder, to keep internal doors open So this is to reduce the need to having to touch the door handles frequently. To take your own food and drinks. If we need to work in teams, to use this consistent pairing again. Don't share objects with the householders, and to maintain communication as well. So this would be before and during the work about how the work will be done safely. If you would like any more information about this guidance, the link to the government website is available there, and also our contact details, including the phone number and email if you need any more information.